Dan Gurney, Lee Ioccoa, 007 movies Thunderball and Goldfinger, a pace car for the Indy 500. What do all these have in common? Hello, I'm your host, Gary Neidert, and you're listening to My First Ride podcast. On April 17th of 1964, the automotive world was rocked when a new vehicle was introduced. It was in at least two James Bond films, Thunderball and Goldfinger. Dan Gurney was a driver of the test car before production started. And Lee Ioccoa, the man responsible for the minivan at Chrysler, was responsible for the new car that had been an icon with the auto enthusiast since 1964. The car? The Ford Mustang. When I started researching the origins of the Mustang, it led to so many trails of information, it was almost overwhelming. This is another car that's exciting for me to talk about, partly because I owned a 1979 coupe, the loud and sort of faster car I always wanted in high school. This is a great story that you'll enjoy, so let's just get right on into it. Now, I'm going to talk from an article that was posted on 365 Days of Motoring. And I'll just read the article and I'll make some comments along the way. On April 17th, 1964, Ford introduced the Ford Mustang on the first day of the New York World's Fair in Flushing, Queens. The brainchild of Lee Ioccoa and his production team, the Mustang was essentially a Ford Falcon with a new frame and body. How about that? Could anything good come of the Ford Falcon? It was so successfully marketed, thanks in part to its introduction at the World's Fair, that the Mustang became one of Ford's best-selling models of all time. Ford profits soared after the release of the Mustang. Another of Iacocca's Mustang-related innovations was a new strategy of marketing upgrade packages for the car. To mark the first anniversary of its launch in 1965, Ford introduced the GT Equipment Group as an option on the Mustang, creating the first Mustang GT. Iacocca commented on the success of the package. He said, "People want economy so badly, they don't care how much they have to pay for it." The base price for the Mustang was a skinny $2,368, but buyers purchased an average of $1,000 worth of options. So there we go. This is from Jalopnik, the author of this article. I'm just going to read part of it. Elizabeth Blackstock. It's got some great information. Talking about the Mustang, the car graced magazine covers and commercials, aired simultaneously on all three television networks just before its debut, which just contributed to selling almost 250,000 Mustangs on the first day. As History.com notes, one buyer in Texas, yay Texas, one buyer in Texas reportedly slept at a Ford showroom until his check cleared and he could drive his new Mustang home. In a phrase, it was Ford's most successful launch since the Model A. But part of what made it so great was the fact that it came with some decent specs and a ton of options. The entry level had bucket seats, floor-mounted shifter, 170 cubic inch special 6 inline 6 engine, 3-speed manual with an optional 4-speed or automatic. optional V8 in the small block that made 271 horsepower. Performance options like front disc brakes, a limited slip differential, and a special handling package were also part of the options. Despite the fact that it's been mocked as a secretary car due to its affordability, the potential of the Mustang was obvious from the start. It's been featured on the big screen in movies like Goldfinger and Bullitt, and Carroll Shelby transformed it into a high-powered racer. And anyone who wanted to have a little fun could nab a few of the performance options and have one heck of a good time. Oh, it was fantastic. This is How Stuff Works. Ford also stoked public interest with numerous promotions and events. A highlight was getting Mustang named the official pace car for the 1964 Indy 500. Though a white convertible with blue dorsal racing stripes led the field on Memorial Day, Ford built another 35 ragtops and some 195 hardtops decked out in the same regalia. The convertibles were later sold, the hardtops given away in dealer-sponsored contests. Man, that's a bunch of great information just right there. Now let's get into Wikipedia because there is a ton of information, and it's really hard to condense it to what I condensed it down to because it just kept going off in all these different little trails of information. But this is from Wikipedia, and it says the Ford Mustang has been in continuous production since 1964, and it's currently the longest produced Ford car nameplate. Since 1964, the Taurus has come and gone. All these other cars, models have come and gone, but the Mustang is still here. Currently in its 6th generation, it is the 5th best-selling Ford model. The namesake of the pony car automobile segment, the Mustang was developed as a highly styled line of sporty coupes and convertibles derived from existing model lines, initially distinguished by long hood, short deck proportions. Originally predicted to sell 100,000 vehicles yearly, the 1965 Mustang became the most successful vehicle launch since the 1927 Model A. Introduced on April 17th of 1964, 16 days after the Plymouth Barracuda, over 400,000 units were produced in its first year. The 1 millionth Mustang was sold within 2 years of its launch. In August 2018, Ford produced the 10 millionth Mustang, matching the first 1965 Mustang. The vehicle was a 2019 Wimbledon white convertible with a V8 engine. The success of the Mustang launch would lead to multiple competitors from other American manufacturers, including the Chevrolet Camaro, the Pontiac Firebird, the AMC Javelin, and the Dodge Challenger. But the Mustang got the jump on them all. Hopefully I can get this name correct, but executive stylist John Najjar, who was a fan of the World War II P-51 Mustang fighter plane, is credited by Ford to have suggested the name Mustang. Najjar co-designed the first prototype of the Mustang, known as Ford Mustang 1 in 1961, working jointly with fellow Ford stylist Philip T. Clark. The Mustang 1 made its formal debut at the United States Grand Prix in Watkins Glen, New York on October 7th of 1962. The test driver and Formula One race driver, as well as the 1967 24 Hours of Le Mans winner in a Ford GT40, Dan Gurney, lapped the track in a demonstration using the second race prototype. His lap times were only slightly off the pace of the F1 race cars. How about that? But wait, there's more. Here's our controversy. An alternative view was that Robert J. Eggert, Ford Division Market Research Manager, first suggested the Mustang name. Eggert, a breeder of quarter horses, received a birthday present from his wife of the book The Mustangs by J. Frank Dobie in 1960. Later, the book's title gave him the idea of adding the Mustang name for Ford's new concept car. The designer preferred Cougar or Torino, an advertising campaign using Torino. The Torino name was actually prepared, but Henry Ford II wanted T-Bird too. As the person responsible for Ford's research on potential names, Eggert added Mustang to the list to be tested by focus groups. Mustang, by a wide margin, came out on top under the heading Suitability as Name for the Special Car. The name could not be used in Germany, however, because it was owned by Krupp, which had manufactured trucks from 1951 and 1964 with the name Mustang. Ford refused to buy the name for about $10,000 from Krupp at the time. Chrysler, a manufacturer of mopeds, also used the name. So, Mustang was sold in Germany as the T5 until December 1978. The 1964 Mustang convertible, serial number 1, sold to Stanley Tucker, who was given the 1 millionth Mustang in exchange for his historic car. Now, here's some of the story. Captain Stanley Tucker was a Canadian airline pilot for Eastern Provincial Airways of Newfoundland, Canada. Tucker was the original owner of 2 milestone Ford Mustangs within the car's first 2 years of production. Before the car officially hit the sales floor on April 17, 1964, thousands of Mustangs had already been rolling off the assembly line for the past 5 weeks and getting shipped out to dealers all over. The car was one of approximately 180 pre-production cars built at the Rouge between February 10 and March 5, 1964. These initial cars served 2 purposes. Number 1, they eased Ford into full production by familiarizing workers and supervisors with the build process. And number 2, they formed a batch of physical cars that could be shipped to every major Ford dealer in time for the April 17 launch. Logically, the first cars built were sent to the farthest dealers. Hence, serial number 1 wound up 2,180 miles from Dearborn in St. John's, Newfoundland. Mustang serial number 1 in particular was painted Wimbledon white with serial number 5F08F1000001. The first ordered Mustang was shipped to the Ford of Canada sales district, and it was taken on a nationwide tour of Ford dealer showrooms all across Canada, ending at George Parsons Ford, a dealership perched on the eastern edge of the continent in St. John's. Well, on April 13, 1964, Tucker was driving past the Ford dealer, and he noticed a big crowd in the dealership on introduction day and stopped in to see what the commotion was about. By the time he finished dinner that evening, he decided he had to have that car. So, on April 14th, 1964, Tucker walked into the showroom. Mr. Parsons, owner of the dealership, wanted to retain the car for a few days because it was the only Mustang he had in stock. But Captain Tucker persuaded his young salesman, Harry Phillips, to break street date and make it available 3 days before April 17th, when Ford officially released Mustang to the world. A deal was reached and a check was written on the spot. Tucker took serial number 00001 home and, for a short time, was the general public's only Mustang owner. At the time, he had no idea he had purchased the first Mustang ever ordered. Quote, "For a long time, I was the only Mustang owner in Newfoundland. It was quite an experience," end quote. Captain Tucker recalled, "Many times other motorists would force me to the side of the road to ask me about the car, what it was, who made it, how did I like it, and how much did it cost." Once it became known a couple of weeks later that Mustang number 1 had been inadvertently sold, Ford officials reached out to Tucker to try to buy it back. Tucker declined the request. He spent the next 2 years putting some 10,000 miles on his pony car. By early 1966, when nearly 1 million Mustangs had been sold and the car's status as a Ford landmark was secure, the Ford Motor Company called again. This time, Ford offered Tucker a worthy trade. In exchange for returning serial number 1, he could have the 1 millionth Mustang free of charge, equipped to his specifications. Tucker agreed, and when filling out the order, covered the entire option sheet with single large X. In other words, every option. The car was a silver frost convertible with a black top, a deluxe black interior with a wood grain steering wheel, styled steel wheels, cruise-o-matic transmission, air conditioning, stereosonic tape player, disc brakes, and rally pack. It even had a Philco television. The only extra he did not take was the high-performance 289 engine. And why? It carried a shorter warranty period. What a thing. Tucker traveled to Dearborn, Michigan, where Ford wined and dined him in the company of executives such as Lee Ioccoca, Don Fry. On March 2nd, 1966, Tucker's loaded 66 Mustang convertible rolled off the line amid fanfare and excitement. Captain Tucker posed for photos with his new Silver Frost 1966 Mustang convertible. Meanwhile, Ford reclaimed Tucker's much-loved serial number 1 and soon donated it to the Henry Ford, that's a museum, where it's on display to this day. After taking delivery of the millionth Mustang early in 1966, Tucker pressed it into daily use in all kinds of weather, including nasty Canadian winters. The elements took their toll. Through the years he drove the Mustang thousands of miles. He even pulled a trailer with it. By the time the 1970s came around, Tucker knew it was time to sell the Mustang and opt for something new. He sold the car to his mechanic and never saw it again. Now, there would be a great story to find out who bought the car from the mechanic and if that car even exists today. The Ford Mustang began production 5 months before the normal start of the 1965 production year. The early production versions are often referred to as 1964.5 models. But all Mustangs were advertised, VIN coded, and titled by Ford its 1965 models. Though minor design updates in August 1964 at the formal start of the 1965 production year contribute to tracking 1964 and a half production data separately from the 1965 data, with production beginning in Dearborn, Michigan on March 9th of 1964. The new car was introduced to the public April 17th, 1964, as I've said before, at the New York World's Fair. Body styles available included a two-door hardtop and a convertible with a 2+2 fastback added to the line in September of 1964. Now here's where it comes to the movies. A white convertible with red interior was used as product placement when the James Bond movie Goldfinger was released September 17, 1964, at its London premiere, where Bond girl Tilly Masterson was in a spirited chase with James, driving an Aston Martin DB5 in the Swiss Alps. A turquoise coupe was again used in the next film, Thunderball, at its Tokyo premiere December 9, 1965, with Bond girl Fiona Volpe, hope I got that right, as she drives James to meet the villain Emilio Largo at his compound at a very high rate of speed across the Bahamas to achieve an advertised list price of $2,368. The Mustang was based heavily on familiar yet simple components, many of which were already in production for other Ford models. Many, if not most of the interior, chassis, suspension, and drivetrain components were derived from those used on Ford Falcons and Fairlanes. The use of common components also shortened the learning curve for assembly and repair workers, while at the same time allowing dealers to pick up the Mustang without also having to invest in additional spare parts inventory to support the new car line. Original sales forecast projected less than 100,000 units for the first year. This mark was surpassed in 3 months from rollout. Imagine that. Another 318,000 would be sold during the model year, which was a record. And as said before, in its first 18 months, more than 1 million Mustangs were built. Several changes were made at the traditional opening of the new model year, beginning August 1964, including the addition of backup lights on some models, the introduction of alternators to replace generators, an upgrade of the 6-cylinder engine from 170 to 200 cubic inch, with an increase from 101 to 120 horsepower, and an upgrade of the V8 engine from 260 to 289 cubic inches, with an increase from 164 to 210 horsepower. The rush into production included some unusual quirks, such as the horn ring below the Ford Falcon logo, covered by a trim ring with a Ford Mustang logo. These characteristics made enough difference to warrant the designation of the 121,538 early versions as 1964 and a half Mustangs, a distinction that has endured with purists. I'll have some links to, of course, the Wikipedia and all these others. There is a podcast that I've been listening to that deals with the early model Mustangs. It's a really great podcast. Sorry, I don't remember the name of it, but I'll include that link in the show notes on the website. So be on the lookout for that. And I highly recommend that you go to Wikipedia to read about all this information on the Mustang. It's really cool. What's coming up next on My First Ride? I'm constantly searching for people that would enjoy telling the stories of their first rides and how their lives were influenced by them. And I bet you probably know someone that would be a great guest for My First Ride podcast, right? Let me know a little bit about them and their story. What about telling your story on the podcast? Let me know a little bit about you and your first ride. Check us out and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and more. And be looking out on Google Podcasts because I just signed up on that the other day, waiting for that to be approved. And of course, you can also go to the website at myfirstridepodcast.com. One final thought. You may not have your first ride, but you still have the memories. It's time to share them. Contact me if you have any questions regarding today's podcast, or you'd like to be a guest on My First Ride podcast. I'm Gary Neidert, and you've just experienced My First Ride podcast. Call me 972-771-7899 or send me an email. myfirstridepodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.